This will be my how many times of celebrating the Holy Week. I don't know how many times since I was an altar boy and until now a very old priest. And it has helped me a lot, celebrating the Holy Week. But I'm sure many of us, as there are so many heads, so many experiences or so many opinions, some would even reduce it to just mere, religious activity. We just go by the tide without really sinking into the deeper meaning of the Holy Week for our lives as human beings, but most especially as Christians. Actually, even the apostles, they had to go through this journey of having to understand the Paschal mystery. It was a big difficulty. If you recall in the scriptures, they were so frustrated, because they had their own way of looking at Jesus. And even the people of Israel, the Jewish people, they were so frustrated when given the choice between Barabbas and Jesus. They had to choose Barabbas because Jesus did not fit into their expectation of a Messiah. And even the apostles, they had to run away. Remember that two disciples going to Emmaus? They were so frustrated. They said, after 3 years of investing our lives with him, listening to his talks, to his words, and with saying all these miracles, just that, death on the cross. So they were so frustrated. And even when the news of his rising from the dead was told them, still it did not have so much of weight to convince them that the reality of who Jesus really was. St. Paul is telling us in his first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 15, his rising from the dead is the most important, because had he not risen from the dead, everything would have been futile, useless. But that uselessness begins the way we understand, or how we understand Jesus. Many times we just reduce him to become, a religious icon. Simply that. And with so many, things in our minds. But for me, having to grow all these celebrations of the Holy Week, I had to get into the point to really know who Jesus is, who Jesus was, till finally I'm able to understand his rising from the dead. I would like to begin that with Isaiah, because in Isaiah, for me now, the best way to understand the Paschal mystery is to understand how he is presented by Isaiah as the Ebed Yahweh, as the servant or the sovereign servant of Yahweh. If we go, for example, into the 4 songs of the servant of Yahweh, like the first song, you will see how he's described by Isaiah, prophesied by Isaiah. In chapter 42, for example, verses 1 to 7, so clear who Jesus really is. And down to the second song, in 49, 4 to 11, or thereabouts, he's presented very differently, like a lamb. Like a lamb. So if you see Christ the way it is prophesied by Isaiah, we will understand for example, Gethsemane, and the carrying of the cross, and even the crucifixion, and his burial. Without understanding who really he is, then we will miss the point, just like I did in the past, reducing just him as an icon of my religiosity, or even natural religiosity. Beautiful is the third song of the servant of Yahweh. In chapter 50 of Isaiah, I think it's chapter 4 to 12, he's portrayed differently. If you have some Bible there, open it to 50 of Isaiah, the third song of the servant of Yahweh. And into the fourth song in 52:12 until 52:13 and then 53:12. You will see that his face is really mangled and even unrecognizable. He doesn't look like a human being because of that suffering that he had to go through because of you and me. to bring us to get closer to our death, so that our death will have the possibility to rise again, or to rise with him. And when we go to St. Paul, in his letter to the Philippians, in chapter 2, verse 7, it is very clear. You will see how Christ is presented in there. He became a man, but even lower than a man, a servant, that suffering servant of you were. There's so much to reflect on this. I wish we had all the time to do that. A retreat, for example, about this. Because even in that Easter Vigil, the readings, for example, the first reading, all these are beautiful readings. There are 7 readings, 1 epistle, and then the Gospel. 9 in all. But the first reading, it talks about the night. The night of creation when there was darkness, and the night of Abraham when he was about to sacrifice Isaac at Mount Moriah, and even the night when they left Egypt to the promised land, passing through the desert, all these points out, or points deeply into who really Jesus is. Just like in the second night I was mentioning about Abraham in Mount Moriah, when he was about to sacrifice Isaac. In that darkness, we see the light. It is only in this that we realize why Christ has to die on the cross. Why all this darkness? Why all this dying in the season of Lent? Why all this mortification? When we get to really know who Jesus is and the plan of God, then his rising come into place. It is so clear. I wish we had all the time to read the Bible, to read the servant songs of Yahweh, the one of Isaiah, and even other parts of the scriptures, describing who really he is. Because if we know who Jesus is, then Easter Vigil would not be something that we have to sleep in the liturgy, but something very interesting, something that we have to vigil, to be awake, even if it's a long liturgy. Just like the Paschal Seder of the people of Israel, we have to eat for the long night. The children had to ask the father, why is it tonight that we're not sleeping? Why is it that we don't eat the usual bread? Then it will come into place. Beautiful, that the Lord is risen. It is the one that gives us the meaning to our lives as human beings and as Christians.